Okay. Welcome everybody to our second session in the Best of Both Worlds mini-series, which I'm looking at as, because Best of Both Worlds I have a lot of sessions on, the Best of Both Worlds, Heroes and Icons. And for our second session, which is today, and for our third session, which is a week from now, we will be talking about superheroes. Next week, we'll be focusing on secret identities. So because that's such a major topic within superheroes, I wanted to spend as little time as possible today talking about it. Right. So there's so much to say, but what I want to do is present some of the ideas that seem important to me, that are insights that I've gotten anyway from superhero comics. There are a lot of different stories now that are told in comics form, or as Will Eisner preferred to put it, sequential art. Sounds a lot more impressive when you call it sequential art. If anybody's interested in the topic of how telling a story is different, what are the pros and cons of telling a story with either just text or with text and pictures, I recommend this book. This is basically the main book on the subject, Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. So really, we're not talking about graphic novels in general. There are you could tell any story with words and pictures together. We're going to be focusing on superhero comics, which have been around for since the early 1900s, but have become, especially in the last couple of decades, much more mainstream, much more a part of the culture. It's become more socially acceptable to call yourself a nerd, which used to be a very negative term. Now it just means somebody who's really into fill in the blank. Somebody who's very into the whether it's comic books or Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or baseball or something else that isn't associated with fiction. Nevertheless, it's become much more socially acceptable. What I'm not going to be focusing on is the Jewish connections of the people who created the superhero characters. But if anybody's interested in this topic, then I recommend this book, Up and Away. Here, How Jewish History, Culture, and Values Shaped the Comic Book Superhero by Simcha Weinstein. He mostly talks about the people. I'll just mention briefly. Obviously, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, two nice Jewish boys who created Superman. Bob Kane and Bill Finger, who created Batman. Jerry Robinson, who invented the Joker. Will Eisner, I mentioned before, who created the Spirit and pioneered the form of telling serious stories with in a comic book format. Julius Schwartz, a very important publisher in science fiction comics, and who created the person behind the Justice League of America. Martin Odell, the guy behind the Green Lantern. Jack Kirby, who's quoted here at the beginning of the story sheet. His original name was Jacob Kurtzberg. He, with Joe Simon, created Captain America. And Martin Goodman of Marvel Comics, and the person who succeeded him, Stan Lee, who used to be Stanley Lieber. And he, of course, was at least partly responsible for Spider-Man, the Incredible Hulk, Fantastic Four, the X-Men, etc. For purposes of this class, I'm going to be focusing on Superman and Batman, not only because they were the first major ones, 1938 and 1939, but also because they have a staying power that is much, gives them a, not sure why, but there seems to be more depth in at least some of their stories than in those of other comic book characters. But before we talk about superheroes, I want to talk about the idea of heroism. And one might ask, does the fact that Judaism famously says in Pirkei Avot, who is strong? The person who controls himself. So does that mean that, like, we shouldn't be reading, we shouldn't be interested in stories about people who are strong, who are heroic? So there are two ways to answer this question. One of them is to say, well, it's nice to fantasize, but then there's heroism on what does it mean for me to be a hero? I can't be like Superman and Batman, but I can be a hero in a different way, and that would be this first answer, the heroism of self-control. I put here, since everybody's seen Pirkei Avot, I put the variation here, commentary on it, early commentary by Chazal, Avot Rabbi Natan. Ezu Gibor Sheb Giborim, who is the strongest of the strong? Kovesh Yitzro, the person who controls his own inclination. And then skipping a little bit, V'yesh Omrim, this part isn't as well known. And some say, who's the strongest of the strong? Misha Oseh Son O Ohavo, the person who turns his enemy into his friend. To do that, that's the strongest thing of all. And it's interesting to think about. But really, we could have a whole discussion just about this concept. What does it mean to be strong, or alternatively a hero, by conquering yourself? Perhaps the best elaboration on this idea is in Rabbi Soloveitchik's famous essay, Catharsis, published in Tradition 1978, where he contrasts not heroes today, but heroes in classic times, Greek, Roman myths, where their heroes were grandiose. Hero worship is self-worship. The crowd cheers. The bards and minstrels sing. But Rabbi Soloveitchik says, but biblical heroism, no, that's different. That's not loud but hushed. It's not dramatic. It's mute. The individual, instead of undertaking heroic action sporadically, lives constantly as a hero. And he goes on to elaborate. There are pages and pages of this self-control in one's sexual life, and in life in general. Men of property must forego the pleasure of acquisition if the latter is halachically and morally wrong. You need to possess the capability of withdrawal. And his source for this is the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. So yes, everyday heroism, that's different from what most people mean when they say being a hero. But it turns out that there is room for the strong, physically strong kind of hero in our tradition as well. This source is not as well known, but it is a midrash source number 3, Midrash Tehillim, also known as Shocher Tov. What is strength? A person sees someone else about to fall into a pit. If the person pushes him in, or sees the other person on a rooftop and pushes him off the roof, is that strength? No. Does a person deserve to be called strong? When somebody is about to fall into a pit, and the other person takes him by the hand so that he doesn't fall. Or you see somebody has already fallen into the pit, and you lift him up from the pit. That's gevura. Meaning, what this source number 3 has in common with source number 1 is that they both are rejecting the concept that being strong is strength is physical strength only. It's being able to chop down the trees or plow the fields or fight in war, which is really in most cultures throughout history. That's what it means to be strong, to be a soldier. And this says no. So the first source talks about being strong, being a hero is controlling yourself. The other one is, no, being strong, being a hero is when you help somebody else, when you save somebody else. That is what it means to be a hero. So just briefly, a panel from All-Star Superman, a book that I will talk about a little bit later. This is one page which is not connected to the rest of the story. And I'll just make it a little bigger. Artist is Frank Quitely. See the teenager is about to jump off a roof, and you see that she's crying, and she's not sure if she wants to go through with it. And suddenly, without any warning, you see Superman behind her, and he says, "Your doctor really did get held up, Regan. It's never as bad as it seems. You are much stronger than you think you are. Trust me." and the page ends in a word was hugged. That's the end of Regan's story. It's just like that's just something that Superman does without even thinking about it. That's part of who he is. He stops people from jumping off buildings. Yes, the stories are mostly about how he's fighting the super villains and the aliens from malicious planets. But this is part of who he is, and we will come back to this. Anyway, I just thought this was interesting. I saw this panel, and I read this midrash, and I was like, oh, okay. Save somebody from falling off and killing and dying. That's what Superman does. There's a book that I recommend. I actually have it here. Wisdom from the Batcave: How to Live a Super Heroic Life by Rabbi Carrie Friedman. It's not a big book, and this he's gives seminars to FBI. It's very clever. This is basically, it's a Musar book. It's a book about being a better person, and all the examples in this book are from actual Batman comics. And he has a bunch of short Haskamot approval paragraphs from like kind of who's who of DC Comics. And I just want to clarify, in case anybody's wondering, that there are a lot of Batman stories in which he doesn't have these positive character traits. But Superman, Batman, and anybody else who's a character in serial fiction, meaning many stories written over the course of decades by many different people, you're going to have somewhat of a variety. Anyway, so the reason I mention this book now, Wisdom from the Batcave, is because Rabbi Friedman, who wrote that book, told a story about Rabbi Victor Miller, who was not known for being very modern or open to modernity, and the story is about somebody wanted to distribute comic books to the kids of a shul on Simchas Torah, and somebody objected, and Rabbi Miller asked the person, like, leave me these comic books. Let me read through them. And Rav Miller told the person that no, it's a mitzvah to give out these books to the kids. They teach law and order to the kids by making sure the hero always overcomes the villain, no matter what obstacles he encounters. And the heroes even teach humility, since they disguise their true identities and to keep their good deeds confidential. And you know what? At least on the level of kids, what you want kids to get out of it, that's fine. That's good enough. And the first of the two things that he said here, the hero always overcomes the villain. That ties in with a theme that appears not only in Superman and Batman, but it appears throughout contemporary fiction. And this is I put here at the bottom of page 1 and the top of page 2 a section from TV Tropes, which I will explain. TV Tropes is a website that pulls together ideas from everything in fiction, mostly contemporary fiction, but books and movies and anime and literature, I mentioned that, real life. And what's impressive, you can't tell that from the source sheet so much, but you see I shared the screen here. This is the page, Heroic Spirit. Every one of these things that's in blue, every single one of these is a different page. So fine, they give cute names to different themes. What does it mean to have the heroic spirit? Well, there are 12 or so different themes that appear in literature that tie in with this. And I'll just show you one of them, the one that they call the Determinator. A character.
Hello?
I don't hear anything.
I don't know, 15 or so types of media. Every single one of these opens to a different page of examples. So comic books, click on comic books under Determinator, and you see, aside from this little picture of Spider-Man here, they have a few examples from Spider-Man. Right after that, Batman in most incarnations. We will talk shortly about the book Whatever Happened to the Caped Crusader. And then they mentioned a few others, Nightwing, even Bane, a bad guy, Superman. Each one of these is an example of this theme or sub-theme that appeared in about this particular figure. TV tropes is a great example of comparing themes between different media. So the idea that what characterizes the hero, that the hero never gives up. So this is associated especially with Batman in the book that I'm holding up right now, and that I will show you a quote from. Whatever Happened to the Caped Crusader by the great contemporary fantasy author Neil Gaiman. I mentioned him last time. This is the cover you see on the screen. It is a story about the death of Batman, but it's more like a story about stories. Very briefly, Batman finds himself a disembodied spirit at his own funeral, and in which people come and talk about him. They're all like different versions of Catwoman and the Joker, etc. They all contradict each other. Each one tells a different story about supposedly how he died. Some of them are new stories, some of them are old stories, but the idea is that eventually Batman realizes that this is more like his meta funeral. Eventually, everybody dies, but this is what they all have in common. What you're seeing here on the screen is one of the panels from Whatever Happened to the Caped Crusader. This is when Batman internalizes the message, and the message is, of all these stories is, by the way, the text, when I'm reading the panels here, the text is also on the source sheet, which if after the quest you can download it from the WebYeshiva webpage. The Batman doesn't compromise. I keep the city safe, even if it's safer by just one person. I do not ever give in or give up. Sometimes and then he describes different ways in which he dies. I don't ever give up. I can't give up. I'm the Batman. Sorry for not reading this in deep voice. It would probably slow me down, and probably not worth it. You can imagine for yourself. I protect the city. I rescue people. I investigate crimes. I guard the innocent. I correct the guilty. And I get it. At the end of the story, I'll just make this a little bit bigger. Here we go. The end of the story of Batman is he's dead, because in the end, the Batman dies. What else am I going to do? Retire and play golf? It doesn't work that way. It can't. I fight until I drop, and one day I will drop, but until then, I fight. And this concept that it's not just an aspect of Batman, that's who he is, that he never gives up, according to Neil Gaiman in the story anyway. That is the defining characteristic of him. And just one more page from this book. It's actually earlier. The first three panels are Clayface talking about something inspirational that Batman said to him. And then there's Harvey Bullock, who is a detective in the Gotham City Police Department. His entire story is here, meaning his three panels telling a story at Batman's funeral. So he threw me the baby and I caught her, and then the floodwater hit like a battering ram and washed him away. I made it out of there carrying the baby. People said to me, "How did you keep going?" I said, "Because he kept going." And that's the end of his story, and then it moves on to somebody else. But the idea is that it's not that what's significant about telling stories in which superheroes never give up. What's significant is that those of us who read it, whether children or adults, we can't be superheroes, but we can be like that. We can refuse to give up when we're doing something important. That is something that is an important lesson that we can get from superheroes. Now, the issue, some people might be wondering, but like, aren't superhero comics like only for kids? And a lot of them are for kids or for teenagers, but a lot of them are not. And it's become a little bit better known now. But I just want to read a couple of quotes Neil Gaiman, same person, did an introduction to one of the books of Astro City. We'll talk about Astro City shortly. And in this introduction, which became republished in Neil Gaiman's collection of nonfiction, here are, in my opinion, two major ways in which superheroes are used in popular fiction. In the first way, superheroes mean purely and simply what they mean on the surface. In the second kind of fiction, they mean what they mean on the surface, true, but they also mean more than that. They mean pop culture on the one hand, hopes, dreams, or the converse of hopes and dreams, the falling away of innocence on the other. There is room to move beyond the literal. Things can mean more than they mean. It's why Catch-22 isn't just about fighter pilots. It's why Moby Dick is about a lot more than whaling. And I'm not talking about allegory here or metaphor, which it can be. I'm talking about what the story's about, and then I'm talking about what it's about. Remember, the person who's writing this, Neil Gaiman, is a super successful author. You've probably heard of at least some of his fantasy novels, like American Gods, which is more for adults, Coraline, which is more for children. But even before that, he was a super successful graphic novel writer with the series The Sandman. The point is, he's an expert storyteller, and he's saying it's what the story's about and what it's about. Things can mean more than they literally mean, and that's the dividing line between art and everything that isn't art, or one of the lines anyway. And he kind of leaves it at that, but like gets you thinking, okay, how do you know, the big question, what is art? Or what counts as quality in any given medium? It's a good question. But for starters, one way of answering that question is it just itself or is it about something more? And now I want to talk briefly about Kurt Busiek, Busiek, who back in 1995, or a little bit beforehand, he created a series. He did other things, but this is what he's most famous for, Astro City, which we'll look at a panel of shortly. But he says in his introduction that he's told that people tell him that superheroes, it's just juvenile. Yeah, but this objection points out what to me, he says, is the greatest strength of the superhero genre, the ease with which superheroes can be used as metaphor, as symbol. A genre that can do something like that, is that really a limitation? I don't think so. And then he proceeded to tell a bunch of superhero stories that made you think and reevaluate the nature of the superhero in ways that nobody else ever did. Well, we're going to come back to Astro City. But this brings us to the great burden, okay? A little kid thinks about, wouldn't it be great to have power? What would you do with power? Wow, wouldn't it be great if I could fly? Why would you fly? Just, to fly. Like, why do you need any reason? Or wouldn't it be great to be super powered? Then you could beat up all the people who've been bothering you. In other words, to have a power fantasy, it's just natural to want to use power to make up for all, to become a better version of yourself in the sense of a stronger, physically stronger version. But to get power and become somebody who helps somebody else, that does not necessarily follow. As we said at the beginning, what does it mean to be a gibor? People think it means to be physically strong. No, according to the midrash that we saw. No, it means to help somebody. So, for example, in the most famous probably one of the most famous stories ever told in superhero comics, the origin of Spider-Man back in 1962, where he's a very awkward person. Everybody laughs at him, and he gets these powers. And what does he proceed to do? He shows up at a wrestling match to win the prize because he's super strong. And then he becomes a celebrity. He goes on TV and he shows his great power. Getting power for him is having everybody like you and being a celebrity. And I think for a lot of people it would mean that. And then what happens? This part of the story is better known. Somebody says, "Hey, stop that thief." He says, "Not my problem. You can stop him." And then only later does Spider-Man discover that that thief is the one who murdered who would go on to murder Peter Parker's beloved Uncle Ben. And the way that the story ends, very, very famous here. My fault, all my fault. If only I had stopped him when I could have, but I didn't. And now Uncle Ben is dead. And then the last panel, this is the narrator, unlike the way they later retold the story in which Uncle Ben's the one who said this. A lean, silent figure slowly fades into the gathering darkness, aware at last that in this world, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. Of course, you've heard this before. It's the most famous, by far, the most famous line from comic books. So here's the interesting thing. It was, come back to that afterwards. It was like a throwaway line at the end there. Stan Lee did not make that up. You see from source 10b here that somebody had this line as far back as 1793. But what did Stan Lee do? He took that idea that great power should lead to great responsibility, and he matched it with the power of the superhero, which nobody had done before, at least not explicitly. If you get power, then you now have the responsibility to help people. And the difference, you could say, in fact, we're going to see this momentarily, the difference between the heroes and the villains in a lot of superhero comics, the difference is not so much what they believe or what they stand for. The difference is they both have power, but the villain uses the power to show the world, get back at those bullies, take over the world, use the power for themselves. And the superhero uses the power to help other people. That's a difference. It's not always recognized, but it actually makes a lot of sense. To illustrate that, I want to share with you something from Ultimate Spider-Man by Brian Bendis, who's one of the top writers in comic books today. And this is set when Spider-Man is just getting started, and he's very unsure of himself, and he has a conversation with the Human Torch of Fantastic Four. Okay, and the Human Torch says to him, "I just wanted to tell you it's normal." What is the stuff you're going through? It's normal. And and Human Torch explains this thing we get to do. It's normal to be a little freaked out about it. See, Reed, as in Mr. Fantastic, the head of the Fantastic Four, he wouldn't admit this, but we're all in therapy. Good luck finding that in a superhero comic, but here it is. This is an official superhero comic, and Spider-Man's like, really? And he goes on to say, are you kidding? Individual counseling, family counseling, marriage counseling, group counseling. Ben and I go on a regular week, 4 times a week. But the one thing my doctor told me that really put it all in perspective, the one thing that's really helped is you choose. You choose to see this all as a blessing or you don't. You choose to accept the responsibilities or you don't. And then he says to Spider-Man personally, you get your powers by accident? Yeah, me too. And what do? We chose to do something worthwhile with them. We chose that. And some of these colossal idiots we come up against, they choose to use whatever they have as some kind of excuse to be vindictive or just plain mean. They didn't have to do that. They chose to. Looks like you chose right. You chose, well, the costume was an odd choice, but the rest of it, you're doing good. People need you. Bottom line, you chose right. And he concludes, okay, well, you ever want to go to a ball game or something? Swing by. To be honest, I have absolutely no friends anymore. Which brings us to the issue which is mostly ignored by superhero comics, but which Astro City brings up in the very first issue is, if you really take it seriously, if you think that with your great power comes great responsibility, then you can't have very much of a life of your own. Or if you, to the extent that you do, you're going to need to question yourself, how much right do I have to a life of my own? And this brings us to the scene from Astro City. It's the same book that I showed before. This is the first book of the series. The very first scene in the book, when you know nothing about the characters. The first is the cover of the book. The first scene involves a character who looks a lot like Superman. He can't be Superman. It's a different company. And he's constantly flying around saving people, obviously influenced by Superman. But he's narrating to himself how many seconds it takes him to do each thing. Take a look. This is in his mind. His name is Samaritan, not to be confused with Superman, just because they both start with an S and end with an N, and both have superpowers and are both really nice, etc. It's an homage. Okay, the afternoon goes by. A jailbreak at Byro Island, less than a second to fly there. Helping the Maritime Museum raise the Sea Blaze, sunk in 1665 off the Florida coast, 3 seconds. And a frightened little ball of orange and white, meaning a little kitten, on Cicero Street. I slow down 2 seconds to let the little girl see me clearly and reassure her that it's all right. And it almost costs a man in Boston his life. Take a look at this panel. And then we switch to the next page, which is the same guy. Less than a second later, Samaritan swoops down and puts the building back together that was about to fall and that was in the process of falling and about to kill the guy. I make a note to try not to waste time like that in the future. What did he do? He spent 3 seconds reassuring the little girl that it's okay. And I hold the building together while they evacuate it. I can't save everybody. Let me make this bigger. Oops, too big. I can't save everybody. People die even while I'm saving lives here, but I could still do what I can. Can't I? And then he goes on to do other things. But that feeling that if you are really doing this, you have the power to save people's lives. Not only do you have to do that, but you have to ask yourself how you justify doing anything else at any time. That's a crushing burden. That's presumably at least part of the explanation why in the Spider-Man comic we just looked at, oh yeah, we're all in therapy and we don't have any friends anymore. Because what they're doing is something that comes with a crushing burden. And like I said, this is mostly not addressed in superhero comics, but it's something like if you think about it as an adult, what would it mean to have this kind of power? It wouldn't be something fun. It would be something, it would be a burden, even one that you're glad to do, but still. To illustrate this point, I have a couple of panels from a comic. This is source number 13 on the source sheet, Legends of the DC Universe from August 2000. Wonder Woman is going through some kind of crisis, and Superman and Batman each try to make her feel better. There's something that somebody is asking her to do in order to prevent a war, but it's something that compromises her moral principles, and she feels a bit like, does that mean it's my responsibility if there's a war? So Batman says to her, Diana, we can't save the world. It's not even our job. You set limits, you do what you do, you make peace with yourself, and you sleep at night. This is a concept most people who fly never learn. That's just like an indirect, in this story by Christopher Priest, it's an indirect reference to the idea that people who become superheroes might very well burn out. Okay? Not going to give away too much, but that's a major theme, sub-theme anyway, of the movie Megamind, where, not giving away too much, but superhero decides to quit because he just doesn't feel like it's fulfilling for himself anymore, like he's done it all already. Batman would never do that, which, by the way, is why some people were very upset about the ending of the movie The Dark Knight Rises, where Batman, it seems that he's dead. He's still alive, but he just leaves. He just goes on to do something else. No. Sorry, not true to the character of Batman. But back to this same story. Next page. Superman says to Wonder Woman, Diana, I've wanted to stop every war since I was a boy. I've wanted to save everyone from everything. I realize that every time I put on Clark Kent's glasses and relax for a moment, somewhere on this planet, hundreds if not thousands of people die. I'm not God. I'm only one man. I've made peace with that, and I'd assumed you had too. I don't know for sure, but I would guess that it's not a coincidence that this story was published 5 years after Astro City, because nobody had really addressed this issue before. What would it mean? What would it mean to be able to to feel that I can only do so much, but I can't ever do enough. That could be a very crushing burden. Something that I just want to mention briefly. Alex Ross is one of the comic book artist who is the most photorealistic. These 6 books are each one focusing on a different character. They're not the size of comic books. Here, take a look. Here's the Superman one. It's very large. Okay, it's as long as my forearm here. The premise of Superman Peace on Earth, which is what I'm holding here, the premise is Superman wants to see if he can, at least for one day, can he end hunger? Can he stop people around the world from being hungry? This is the back cover, by the way. I look upon my powers as a gift, not mine alone, but for anyone who needs them. But the premise of this story, it's a weird combination because it's like amazing photorealistic art, but also super depressing because Superman can't end hunger, and he tries, and he runs into more and more obstacles. I just want to show you a couple of panels from this. This, by the way, is much, much larger than the actual size. But he goes to this poor country, and he delivers the food to them. Only one little boy speaks, who looks at what I've given him, then at me, and asks, "Will you come back tomorrow?" I look away. He doesn't have an answer for that because this is not going to solve the problem. It's only going to feed people for one day. And then later on in the book, then he goes places where the military dictatorship prevents him from distributing the food, and he goes other places where, as seen on this page, where people are afraid of him. Either they hide in their homes and the rats eat the grain that he's distributing, or they yell at him and throw rocks at him. That's this picture at the bottom here. And then he collapses at home. Very, very powerful, not the way you usually imagine Superman, slumped in a chair. With the headline, news headline, Superman's mission falls short. That's not what superheroes can do. Even superheroes can't do something like that. But I want to come back to the source sheet. The one way in which one second. Where'd it go? Yeah. One way in which themes in superhero comics compare with something we have in the Torah is the issue of Chasid versus Kovesh at Yitzro, which is found in the Rambam, Shimon Prakim. I'm using this edition, the one from Judaica Press, translated by Rabbi Eliyahu Tuger. The difference between a pious person and one who overcomes his desires. We're not going to go through this now, but just the Rambam basically sets it up as the philosophers, meaning the non-Jewish philosophers, think that somebody who's naturally good is on a higher level than someone who isn't naturally good but controls himself. Kovesh at Yitzro, like the phrase from Pirkei Avot. He says, but the sages say the opposite. The person who overcomes his problems is on a higher level than the person who's naturally pious. And how can this work? And the Rambam ends up giving an answer to this question, which is all here on page 3 and page 4. I recommend looking at it when you get a chance. What this has to do with our topic is that in some ways, Superman corresponds with the Chasid, the person who is naturally good. He's good through and through. There are very few stories about his being tempted without some external thing like, I don't know, red kryptonite. As opposed to Batman, not so much that he's tempted, but that Batman is struggling. Batman doesn't have natural powers unless you count having a lot of money as a natural power. Batman brought himself to where he was by a lot of hard work. Anyway, there's a lot to say about this. I just want to share a couple of things about Batman and Superman. Glenn Weldon, who writes about pop culture for NPR, and he has a book about Superman, which we'll quote from next week. He also has a book about Batman, which we'll, if we have time, we'll quote from in this session. But he has an article in which he says, Superman is an ideal. He represents our best self. He's not the hero we identify with. That's That's Spider-Man. He worries. We see in Spider-Man we see ourselves as we are, but in Superman we see ourselves as we hope to be. He is born with tremendous gifts, meaning just by being born, under a yellow sun, he has superpowers. He could do anything he wants, anything at all. And what he chooses to do first and always is to help others. And as I tried to indicate before, in the context of with great power comes great responsibility, that does not automatically follow. Someone who kind of brought this idea, emphasized this idea more than anybody else in recent years is Grant Morrison. Grant Morrison, who's super successful graphic novel artist, writer, not just Superman, Batman, but a lot of other stuff. His Invisible series, really weird, but really creative. Grant Morrison also wrote a book, the old-fashioned kind of book with just words about superheroes, reflecting on superheroes. And I don't agree with everything that he says there, but he has a lot of insights. Just going to show the cover of this book, a couple of editions. In this edition, the book called Super Gods, the front cover is like cut out the mask and put it on yourself. You imagine that you are the superhero. The next page, this is actually the edition that I read, Super Gods by Grant Morrison. What are these images? These images are taken from, look at the screen, taken from the first page of the comic written by Grant Morrison called All-Star Superman. This is the first page. Doomed planet, desperate scientists, last hope, kindly couple. That's it. That's the entire backstory of Superman, meaning you know it already. We're just summarizing it for you in 8 words. That's all you need. So he used that as the cover of one of the editions of his book, Super Gods. This is the cover of All-Star Superman. The artwork is quite amazing. So Grant Morrison, back to the source sheet. One second. Where'd it go? Yeah, Grant Morrison describes how there's mediated, prepackaged rape, degradation, violence, mass murdering heroes. Meaning he's complaining about not only in superhero comics, but in Game of Thrones and all sorts of other media where the good guys are anti-heroes. All-Star Superman was our attempt at an antidote to all that by positioning Superman as the Enlightenment ideal paragon of human physical, intellectual, and moral development that Siegel and Shuster had originally imagined. An indestructible hero, so strong, so noble, so clever and resourceful, he had no need to kill to make his point. There was no problem Superman could not solve or overcome. He could not lose. And he would never let us down, because we made him that way. He dressed like Clark Kent and took the world's abuse to remind us that under our shirts waiting, there's always a familiar blaze of color. Interesting formulation there. So on the one hand, Superman is the naturally good person, both nature and nurture. He was raised by very, very nice people who were farmers in the middle of America. And nevertheless, Superman has his struggle as well in a different way. I want to talk about briefly Superman as survivor. Elie Wiesel, in a book that talks about Tanakh characters and characters from the Gemara and Hasidic Rebbes, he talks about Noach as the first survivor. Many survivors are haunted, if not plagued, by unjust guilt feelings at one time or another. At one point, Noach must have wondered, why me? Poor Noach, a survivor of cosmic tragedy, he is haunted by his memories. He escapes into drink and sleep. In other words, that's Elie Wiesel's explanation for why Noach, after the flood, remember Elie Wiesel, writing as a Holocaust survivor, he suggests that it was survivor guilt. And Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau, in his highly acclaimed autobiography, available in English, says, to a certain degree, we survivors are all Noach after the flood. Each one of us survivors must constantly ask, why was I chosen to be saved while others were not? Perhaps I have a role, a mission. In other words, it could very well be that part of Superman feeling that he has to save everybody all the time is not only that he's a really good person and he has the power to save so many people, so he might as well, but also Superman is, in the standard stories anyway, the last survivor. His entire planet was destroyed. That's a heavy burden. And it's in in interest of time, I'll just read it from the source sheet. Story by Dan Jurgens, which Batman tries to understand what made Superman who he was, and he has this line: "It must have been a wrenching experience for them to catapult their son into the reaches of space as Krypton died. How does such an event shape a man? It's one thing to be the last surviving member of a family, as we sometimes find with the Holocaust, but the last surviving member of an entire world? Like, what does that do to a person? Like, he has that in the background." Grant Morrison ties this in with Kandor, the tiny city that's preserved from Krypton. But I thought it was interesting what Howard Jacobson pointed out. Howard Jacobson is the best-known living British Jewish novelist. He's won the Man Booker Prize. That's like the top prize in British literature. He has a column called Up and Oy Vey. I guess it wasn't copyrighted enough. And he has a bunch of things about Superman. He suggests something I haven't seen anywhere else. Superman's sadness is the most Jewish thing about him. Like, that's not what people usually say when they talk about Jewish parallels with Superman. It's a function of his homelessness. When he says Jewish, Jacobson means Jews in Galut, Jews in the diaspora without a homeland. His homelessness, his isolation, his having to perpetuate himself endlessly in good deeds, but above all, it's of a piece with his vulnerability to kryptonite, that poisonous leftover the planet Krypton. How are we to understand the meaning of kryptonite? Yeah. So he says, as far as the story writers, I understand, you need a vulnerability. If somebody's completely invulnerable, he's not interesting anymore as a subject of stories. But on a psychological level, those glowing green rocks humming with radioactivity, they're the tangible proof of Superman's foreign origins, the irrefragable evidence of his alienness. The one who spelled this out the most was Mark Waid, another, skipping to source 23, another very important contemporary superhero author. He wrote a book called Superman Birthright. No, it's not about Superman making a trip to Israel. It's a retelling of Superman's origin story with an emphasis on he is an alien. He's different from us, and maybe that would be a barrier between him and everybody else, and maybe that would be something he has to come to terms with. And so Mark Waid, in his afterword to that book, says that this book is built around the same thing the TV series Smallville is built around. All teenage lives are built around the search for an identity. Okay, but in Clark's case, his quest for identity is complicated by the fact that he is of two worlds. He wants to be one of us, but he's not. He was raised as an Earthman, but he isn't. And this ends up being a major plot point in Superman Birthright. And he comes to the conclusion that maybe embracing his alien heritage rather than trying to run away from it may well be his destiny. And ultimately, how he manages to carve out an identity that accommodates both of the worlds he knows, that's our story, meaning that's the story of Superman Birthright. But it's also the story of us as Jews, or at least as Orthodox Jews. What does it mean to live in both worlds? Something to think about. It. I just wanted to mention this as an example of something that, yes, Superman doesn't have to overcome obstacles the way that non-superpowered heroes do, but he also has things he has to deal with. Even Superman does. Having said that, let's talk about Batman as a Kovesh et Yitzro. Somebody who has to, 1 second, skipping a little bit. Yeah. Someone who has to overcome, someone who has to work really, really hard to get where he is. This is from a series of Batman, a story called No Man's Land. Superman comes to visit Batman, Superman pretending to be Clark Kent, whatever, in his Clark Kent identity. This is where Gotham has been basically destroyed, and Batman's trying to hold things together. And Batman basically tells him, You need to get out of here. You're messing things up. This is a war zone. I progress with strategy. Batman says, I have to be at least 5 moves ahead of my enemies, with 5 contingency plans and 5 backup plans for those contingencies at all times. Wow, that's a lot. This kind of quote is the kind of quote that you'll find in the book that I mentioned at the beginning, Wisdom from the Batcave. Another example of this, perhaps more dramatic, is in a storyline written by Grant Morrison called Batman R.I.P. At the end, near the end of the story, Batman's enemies bury him alive, and they expect him to die. And this is the narration that he gives as he is trying to dig himself out of the grave. I apologize again for not doing a Batman imitation. 206 bones, 5 major organs, 60,000 miles of blood vessels. All it takes is time, days, months, years spent memorizing the finite ways there are to hurt and break a man, preparing for all of them. I've escaped from every conceivable death trap. 10 times, a dozen times. I can slow my breathing and metabolism to control panic and conserve air. Straitjacket is kindergarten. Locks 2. Bench pressing a pine coffin lid through 600 pounds of loose soil that's filling your mouth, crushing your lungs flat, and shredding your dehydrated muscles? That's harder, but far from impossible, he says as he breaks free of the ground. So that dramatizes the point that Batman works really, really hard to get where he is. Our time is almost up. I want to share just a little bit from Kingdom Come, an Elseworld story, meaning like set in an imaginary future as opposed to superhero comics, which are already imaginary, but like super imaginary, not regular continuity. And the art is done by Alex Ross. And this is at the end of the story, okay, where in their civilian identities, Superman, Clark and Diana, who I don't want to give away too much, but they're a couple in a bunch of stories. They're a couple. They meet Batman in his civilian identity in a cheesy cafe called Planet Krypton, in which all the servers dress as superheroes. Kind of ironic there. Anyway, so they say, again, I just want to talk again about how amazing Alex Ross's art is. I just blew it up super, and it almost, not exactly a photo, but a lot closer than, anyway, so they say to him that Diana, Wonder Woman, is pregnant, and they want him, Batman, who has been their enemy throughout this book, not a spoiler, they want him to be the godfather of their child. And Batman says to them, but we are of such different schools, he says to Diana. You and Clark, you rule by trust. I rely on fear. And that is a difference. That certainly is a difference between, to kind of summarize the difference of the character and the image of Superman and Batman through the ages. So our time is running out. I just want to show you something that fits with that. A story written by Dan Jurgens. I mentioned it earlier. Superman's Secret Origins. So Batman disguises himself as the guy in the mustache. He wants to find out how Clark Kent how Superman became the person that he is, meaning Batman has figured out that Clark Kent is Superman, so he goes in disguise to talk with the Kents, who are, in this version, still alive. So he says to them, after spending this time with you, Mr. and Mrs. Kent, I feel like I've come to understand Clark a whole lot better. You made him the man he is. This farm, this life of hard work and honesty is based on faith that the sun will shine, rain will come when you need it, better times are right around the corner. That faith is Clark's backbone, an optimist's view I don't have, says Batman. You two are terrific. You made yourselves one heck of a son. And Ma Kent says as he's leaving, well, thank you for saying so. I'm sure your parents did a fine job of raising you too. And, Batman says to them, I'm afraid not, Mrs. Kent. I lost them when I was very young. their absence was every bit the defining moment of my life as your presence was with Clark's. And then a little bit later in the story, he basically left clues so that Superman would come and find him. Superman comes that a very brief several-month period in which Superman had electric powers and was blue. Don't worry about it. Superman comes to Batman and asks what are you trying to find out? And Batman explains, I knew who you are, but not the why. I had to know why we're so different. We're opposites. You represent the light, while I represent the dark. Remember, he's still a good guy, but he's a good guy representing the dark. That's interesting, not obvious. And the whole vampire image, really not obvious, that somebody who takes looks a lot like a vampire is somehow a good guy. You're a product, Batman says to Superman, you're a product of love and order, while I'm a product of violence and chaos. And Superman says, I suppose so. You were so young when your parents were murdered. It must have been devastating. And Batman unmasks and says, let's just say you grew up with the life I craved. We are, make this a little bigger, we are the end product of our childhood, Clark. Makes you wonder what would have happened if our roles were reversed. Maybe we're not as different as you think. That, I think, is a really great example of a story that it sheds light on Superman, it sheds light on Batman, and it makes you think about not only what's the difference between having natural powers and not having natural powers, but what's the difference, what makes somebody into who they are. Is it the way that they were born? Is it the way that they were raised? Is it what they did with themselves afterwards? Not simple, and that's an example of something that kind of question that we can turn on ourselves. What makes me who I am? Each of us can look in the mirror and ask that question. This is an example of something that just by reading what looks like a simple comic book story, sometimes you can gain insights into, at the very least, the characters and possibly even yourself. Our time is up. Before I take questions, I want to remind everybody that I have uploaded supplementary material to the website, which we're not going to cover in class, but just something peripherally related to this topic that you might find interesting. This week it's two articles called Orthodox Men, X-Men, Orthodox Men, and a certain parallel between a machloket among Jews and a machloket among the protagonist, the main protagonist and antagonist in the X-Men. Our time is up. I'm going to end the recording, and then I'll stay to go over the chat and respond to any questions if anybody has any. But thank you for joining me, and I'm ending the recording now. And see you next week.
Mm-hmm.